Okay, here's the Pythagorean theorem problems from your homework, or from the website. If you got these right, then you don't need to watch this. But if you got them wrong, watch it and figure out what you did wrong. Don't just see how I do it, but look back at your work and see where you went wrong. That's how you're going to learn to solve these problems. So this first example here with this triangle with an unknown side x and a leg 12 and a hypotenuse 15. Let's solve this one. So the first thing you want to do is identify the hypotenuse, which we know is that side that's 15. So this is the hypotenuse. And in the Pythagorean theorem, remember our Pythagorean theorem tells us that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And the hypotenuse is c. So I'm going to have 15 is c. So that you can follow along, I'll call x a and I'll call 12 b. So I want to get a all by itself on one side of the equal sign. Again, I'm going to move this b squared term over. B squared minus b squared is 0. So I end up with a squared equals c squared minus b squared. I want to solve for a, not a squared, so I take the square root of both sides. And I get a equals c squared minus b squared, and the square root of that, and that would be 15 squared minus 12 squared. And the square root of that, when you put it in your calculator, remember I'm calling a x, so I've just switched it here. The square root of that is 9 when you solve it. So that's how you'd solve the first one. Let me get a different color. We'll do the second one. In this question here, I'm going to go across from the right angle. This is my hypotenuse. X, in this case, it's my unknown. I'm solving for the hypotenuse. I will call this 3a, and 8 I'll call b. When I use the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. C is my unknown. I want to get c by itself on one side of the equal sign, and it already is. This term c squared already is, but I can take the square root, and I end up with c equals the square root of a squared plus b squared. And now I just substitute. C equals the square root of 3 squared plus 8 squared, and you can see that it wouldn't have mattered if I had reversed these. 3 squared plus 8 squared is the same as 8 squared plus 3 squared. And when you put that in your calculator, you end up with 8.5. Now, if you're setting this up right and you're getting these wrong, there's probably a problem with how you're putting it in your calculator. So you're going to hit a square root button, and it should, when you look up at the display, when you look on your calculator and you look at what your calculator is showing you pushed in, what buttons you pushed, it should open a parentheses for you up here. If it doesn't, then open your own parentheses. This could be what you're doing wrong. Then open your own parentheses. So you're take the square root of 3, so hit the number 3, and you should have an x squared button on there, plus 8, and you hit that x squared button. And you can close parentheses, and then hit your equal sign. So if you're setting this up correctly and you're getting this wrong, it's probably because these parentheses aren't opening for you automatically up here. So if when you open it you don't see the parentheses open, or if you hit the square root button and you don't see parentheses open, then go ahead and open them. That's probably what you're doing wrong. So go check before you go farther and see if that's what you're getting wrong, and if it is, then you don't need to do this. Go ride a bike or something. So let's do this last one. My unknown side here is x. I'm going to identify my hypotenuse, which is this side opposite the right angle. It's 22, so I call that c when I use the Pythagorean theorem. And this 9 and this x I can call a and b, and it doesn't matter which is which. So let me write the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to solve, I'm calling my unknown b. So let me subtract a squared. Oops, let me undo that. Let me subtract a squared from both sides. And again, you don't need to show me this step. This is just for the sake of those of you who maybe have forgotten some of your algebra. So I end up with b squared equals c squared minus a squared. I don't want to know b squared. I want to know b. So b equals c squared minus a squared. I don't have a lot of room to work here, so I'm just going to plug these numbers in. 22 squared minus 9 squared. And when I solve for that, I get b equals 20. I'll circle around it so my teacher can find it. And we were calling b x, so I should have actually written x. There you go, I fixed it. So those are your first 3 problems. Let's do the next 3. So here we have this triangle. This is in that second row on the website. I go across here. I know this is my hypotenuse, so I'm solving for this. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. My unknown is C. So I'm going to say C equals the square root of A squared plus B squared. And that would be the square root of 11 squared plus 13 squared. And when you solve for that, you get 17. I'm calling C x. Right? I'm calling the hypotenuse x. And so I want to make sure I get in that habit. Because remember, in physics, we're not going to be dealing with just random triangles. We're going to be dealing with a displacement or a velocity or a force. So we want to get used to calling it whatever it is, whether it's the force is 17 newtons or the velocity is 17 meters per second. Whatever it is, we want to get used to treating these as actual measurements, not just numbers. So let's look at the second example here. Again, I'm going to go across from my 90-degree angle. I know 19 is my hypotenuse, and in the Pythagorean theorem, I call that C. I can call this A and this B, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. I just have to get the hypotenuse right. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I'm not solving for C. I'm solving for one of the legs. We'll call it A. I'll subtract B squared from both sides. A squared is C squared minus B squared. I don't want to know A squared. I want to know A. So the square root of A squared is A. So I end up with A equals C squared minus B squared, the square root, and I can substitute now. I'm calling that x. So it's going to be 19 squared minus 8 squared, and the square root of that, and once again, I get 17. And now we'll do this problem here. This is the last one in the second row. I go across. This is C. I can call this either A or B. So I'm going to set it up exactly the way I set the previous problem up. A squared plus B squared is C squared. A is the square root of C squared minus B squared. I'm still calling it x. So x is going to be 25 squared. Oops. No, it's not. X is going to be 31 squared minus 25 squared. And when you put that in your calculator, you hopefully get 18. And we'll put a circle around that. So those are the first two rows of problems. See if you can get the third row by yourself. And then move on and check if you know how to do the trigonometry.